Welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Ron Story Jr., who has been a full-time entrepreneur for over 20 years, and he went from being a struggling insurance salesman to being a self-made entrepreneur, and his software company is called PitchDB, which is the world's largest podcast search engine with nearly 3 million hosts. It saves you hours of digging for podcast contact details in just a few clicks. So we're going to be talking today about cold email, about business life cycles, about major mistakes you might be making with your lead generation, and why buying a business is the ultimate growth hack, mindset, and so much more. We'll pack it all in. We'll make it work. Ron, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, man, that's a lot to talk about, but yeah, we'll get it in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Or if there's some left out, that's a teaser, and that's something that someone needs to go and check you out and check out your websites. We'll leave them wanting more, and we'll have a lot of fun doing it. So we're just a couple of guys in blue shirts. So can you tell us about what you're all about and what's your passion these days?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm the sales guy. When I used to be a financial advisor for 12 years, and then in 2012 I got into the software business. And when you're around a lot of guys that do startups and they've raised money and they have this software stuff, everybody is talking about their code. And I'm like, look, I can't code, but I heard you can't sell. So I became known as the sales guy amongst all of these software companies. So a lot of the private equity firms or venture capital firms here in St. Louis, they relied on me to help their software companies build out their sales programs and their lead generation.
And that's a more exciting part of software, right? There's the coding and the fixing bugs and the making things run faster, which is important. But then what's more exciting is what you do with it, and the lives and the businesses that you change, and the interface, and not just the features, but the benefits and the use cases. And so speaking of that, I know that now you're all about using software to get leads and approach other podcasts. And this is an area where for the past 18 months, I can't believe that I didn't pursue cold email as much as I am now. I have multiple employees now who are working on spreadsheets, talking to people, following up. And before that, I kind of just left so much of my business up to luck. I would make an offer, an opt-in page. I might post on message boards. I might go to conferences. I might reach out to like affiliates now and then, but I felt like it was such a roller coaster, right? It was so much of counting on people to find me instead of doing something more predictable, which is kind of doing that outreach. And you think, well, ideally you should be doing all the above, right? It's good to have your presence and to have the content and have the websites and all that. But also if we can kind of do this outbound marketing and aggressively talk to the prospects and the podcast, et cetera, that we need to talk to, then why not do both, right? Why not have the best of both worlds?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of look at sales very similar to dating, right? I mean, my girlfriend and the mother of my kid, I never put up a website to meet her, right? I went over and I talked to her. And that's how most of our human interactions are. With the people that mean the most to us, we went up and we talked to them, right? And we built friendships that way. We didn't build a web page and tell them to opt in if they wanted to be our friend. So my thoughts were, well, if I can build relationships in my main life that way, the second most important thing to me outside of my family is my business. So I should probably approach my business relationships the way that I approach the relationships that mean the most to me, which is going directly to them, being straight up with them about what my intentions are, not doing some ulterior motive. I'm going to ask them for this, but secretly I want this. No, just being straight up saying, hey, here's the value I think I can bring to this relationship. Is that something that you find valuable? If so, does it make sense for us to be friends? And that's how I just approach life, especially, with the people that are close to me. But, I've let that bleed over into business, and it's worked out pretty well.
I like that metaphor a lot, that your business is like dating, where if you're just sitting on the couch at home expecting someone to find you, it won't happen. And then there's also kind of that aspect of you don't necessarily know where it will go, especially as you say, if you go in without an ulterior motive, if you just say like, oh, here's me, and then here's this other person I'm talking to, just see where it evolves. And you think back to when you were a kid, and it's like, say you had a crush on someone and you were so nervous to talk to them, and the longer you waited, the more nervous you were. And then you started having all these fantasies in your head about, well, I think this person is like this and like that. And then when you met them, it never matched like the idealized vision you had in your head. And when you got older, you realized, man, I should have just been real and taken some action and lived in reality instead of this dream world of like the coulda, woulda, shoulda. And you see that so much in people's businesses, right? They agonize over what should be in my podcast bio. They've been working on a book for 10 years. They'll make a course or a podcast someday, maybe in the next few months. It's all of this like wishing for the future instead of doing something doable and actionable in the present. And so you have this podcast resource of like finding podcasts, finding contact details. So if someone says, I'm tired of living in fantasy land, sitting on the sidelines, I want to use what Ron has for me. I want to take action today. What's something that someone could do today or this week to make a difference in their business?
Yeah, the first thing they can do, they can go sign up for a free account in our software, right? But even if they don't want to do that, they can just find the podcast, hop into Apple, and type in your subject matter that you're an expert in, right? That you think you can help an audience with. And then find those podcasts, go to their websites and find contact. And they have their email address there. Just send them an email. Hey, man, I listened to your episode with Ron Story. I thought he had some great ideas. I would love to be a guest on the podcast. He talked about this, but have you ever thought about this perspective? You just added some value, added another option of a different perspective. You've saved the podcast host probably 3 hours of having to search for another guest down the road. That's the one thing that they don't talk about when you're hosting a podcast is the 2 to 3 hours of research you have to do to find guests. That's the biggest anchor around podcasters' neck is the time that they invest in finding guests to make sure that their guest doesn't come on the show and embarrass them. So if you really have, in the words of Eminem, if you are what you say you are, a superstar, then have no fear. The mic is here and the crowd is ready, right? I think that was Lupe Fiasco. That's the rapper that said that, right? So if you really have the goods, why not tell people? I've never seen a gas station with a landing page, right? Because people need gas. So if you have something that people really need, other people will know it. Or if they don't know it, work on your messaging so that you can communicate the true value of what you have so that when you say it in one sentence, people get it, right? So I know that podcasting is probably the most underused and most efficient way to get in front of thousands of people without having to leave your house. In the past, in order to reach your audience right here that we're talking to before podcasting, I had to go speak at a conference that you were hosting, right? Now I can just come in my office, flip up the computer, hop on, and I'm in front of a couple thousand people. And then it's going to be posted on YouTube. So it's going to be in front of millions of people. And if I run ads to it, now it's in front of millions of people all around the world. So podcasting is that opportunity if you have the goods. If you don't have the goods, go get the goods, go get the skills so that, you can actually help people. But yeah, that's the main thing is if you can really help people, the audiences and the host will recognize that.
You're so right, Ron. And they say that if you are not putting yourself out there, then you're doing people a disservice, right? There are people out there that are stuck that need the tank of gas, so to speak, and you're not giving it to them. You're not giving them your real estate or your stock market or your book writing expertise because you're too afraid at the moment to appear on these other shows. And you're so right about the efficiency and the time factor because I mean, you hop on for 20 minutes, right? I don't even know where you came from. I think I saw like some podcast booking agency sent you my way, but I see my calendar fill up. I hop onto a meeting, and then even when we started the Zoom call, I was just like, "Hey, do you want to chat first?" And you and I were like, "No, let's go. We'll meet each other while we're recording. It'll be 20 or 30 minutes in and out." And you think about, when else can you? 30 minutes of playing around with your paid ads. How many ads could you really set up? Not many. Or 30 minutes tweaking that landing page versus 30 minutes. You show up here, we record this, it will live forever. Like you said, there's podcast content, there's YouTube content. My team's going to cut this up and post on social media regularly forever. It's a really great use of that time. And then you also mentioned that a podcast host love it. You and I both know anyone who's listening can use your or my name to approach some other podcast and say, I was listening to Ron Story's episode, and then he also mentioned something cool, that just because you talked about such and such topic doesn't mean that suddenly that's your domain. Someone can say, I know that Ron talked about podcast guesting and cold emails, but I have my own spin on it, or we can talk about that, but also something in addition. So it's not like it's completely off limits just because someone else talked about it. There's always your special flavor to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of times people underestimate, everybody wants to start a podcast, but they have no marketing mechanism to promote it, right? So it's easier just to find people who already have the audience and then borrow their audience, right? I had to make no investment in getting your audience to listen to your podcast, right? But I save you some time by being an interesting guest and providing some value to that audience. Hopefully someday they'll say, yo, you should have Ron to come back to talk about how he sends cold emails to people. I mean, I've booked, I'll tell you some funny people. George Lucas, everybody likes this story. George Lucas's wife, Melanie Hobson, we cold email. We sent her a cold email and got her to mentor one of my best friends, right? Like, people are like, what? That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I've cold emailed a lot of people. And the thing about it, all they can do is say no or yes. If they say no, I'm in the same place. If they say yes, I'm better off. When Liliana sent you the email, that's my assistant, when she sent you the email about me being on the show, you could have said yes or no. Gratefully, you said yes, and here I am, right? But if I never took that shot, we would never be having this conversation. And I think that that's the takeaway from this episode is, if you don't put yourself in a position to be rejected, you'll never put yourself in a position to be accepted. And I'm just not willing to deal with, no is the last answer. Hey, look, no for me means not now. It's a contraction. It's N-O apostrophe. It just means not now, because I guarantee you, as I get better, the people that have told me no about being on their show, as I become better at being on podcasts and my brand builds, I'll be able to go back and say, hey, I reached out to you a year ago. Here are 85 episodes that I've been on. Is this a good time now? And they may be like, wait a minute, you've been on 85 episodes. Why didn't we have you on before? Right. But I just have to keep putting in the work. And that's everybody starts off with their first podcast. So if you're listening and you've wanted to be on a podcast, just get on any podcast, no matter how many listeners they have. If it's 12 people, let it be 12 people, but help all 12 of them. Right. Take your ego out of it. You're not going to get on Joe Rogan. You're not going to be on, the biggest podcast out there at the beginning. Just get out there and start helping people. And then you'll be surprised how many of those folks will notice you.
I love it. That's very reassuring, that you need to put yourself out there. You need to send those cold emails, that no means not now. And that what's most important is to just build the airplane on the way down, so to speak, and just appear on some shows. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And so just get yourself out there and get your message out there, knowing that you will be rough and raw at first. You won't be perfect, but get on whatever show will take you and deliver your message. And I imagine that in your experience from your travels and from what you've seen, that really accelerates your messaging, doesn't it? Because like you said, if you wanted, back in the they say good old days, but it's kind of bad old days. When you wanted to speak, you had to figure out some conference to go to. You had to convince the event organizer, and maybe if the event was too big, then they wouldn't want you because someone else would take that slot. But then maybe they want you if the event was super small and they were desperate for speakers. So now you're putting in $2,000 for a flight and a hotel and 3 or 4 days of your time just to appear to an event that was too small or didn't have good prospects, because if they had a huge event, they would have invited some big name speakers. So you speak and that's kind of a roll of the dice. Then you have to go back home. But now you're just there and you're back. This is a much better time to be alive. And it's like people don't realize how good it is, right? Compared to how inefficient it was back then. So if someone says, okay, I want to appear on podcasts, but I'm blocked, and they say, I don't know who to contact. What do I say in this cold email? Do I need a bio? So what sorts of things hold people back from taking action on this sort of method that you love?
Well, so I think part of it is not knowing where to find the information, which is why we created PitchDB, to put all that information in one simple place where you can just search for a topic, or you can search for someone who is in your industry. So here's what I like to do. I like to do searches for people that are in my industry. So there's a guy named Brian Olds who works with speakers, and he runs an organization called the Black Speakers Network. Now, every podcast he goes on, it has speakers and coaches on it. Well, guess what? He's been on more podcasts than me. So I just search his name, right? And when I find all the podcasts he's gone on, he's already found the ones that have my audience, because we have the same audience. So now I just reach out to those same hosts and say, hey, I saw you had Brian on that talked about this for speakers. I help coaches and speakers to get on podcasts, which is a different stage than the conference stages that he helps people to get on. Is this the conversation that's worth having with your audience, right? So the first thing is just find someone that's already blazed the path that you've already been on. That makes it easier. They've already identified the audience. The host has already admitted by having them on that he values that type of information, right? The second thing is just send a very simple email. Here's your email. Hey, Robert, I listened to your podcast. I thought it was great. Are you still looking for interesting guests for future episodes? That's it. Don't send anything else. It should sound just like that, right? And then you just put your name at the bottom. Now, if they're looking for guests, cool. They'll say, yeah, we're looking for interesting guests. Who did you have in mind? And then that's when you pitch yourself, right? It's just like dating. When I met my girlfriend, I didn't go over to her and say, hey, let me tell you about what I did for the last 5 years. And I've worked here and I did this. And in 3 years, I think we're going to have kids and we're going to be living all around the world. She would have thought I was a weirdo, but that's how most people's first pitches sound, right? So what I went over and said was, hey, how are you doing? And when she responded, oh, I'm doing okay, right? Now she gave me permission to talk to her. So you're really pitching for engagement. If they're not interested in having interesting guests, then why even waste your time with your pitch? It's no different than if a woman's already married. If she turns around and she says, hey, I'm doing okay, and she points at the wedding ring, she ain't interested in dating you, bro. Just move on. Don't even waste your time showing her your big background and your Tesla and all this stuff that you may think is impressive to her. Just move on. She's already taken. So that's the approach with pitching. Find out if the person is even open to hearing what you have to say. Are you interested in having interesting guests for a future episode? Who's going to say no to that? Right? And if they say, no, we're not interested, we're already booked up, cool. But usually they'll say, yeah, who did you have in mind? Hey, I know a guy. Then how I give them my pitch, and then they can make a decision, right? So that's the approach. Find the people that you already admire. You're already listening to them anyway. Everybody's listening to a podcast with their competition on it to kind of see what they're talking about. So you're already listening. Reach out to those same podcasts and say, hey, are you looking for interesting guests for a future episode? You follow those 2 steps, you're guaranteed to be booked.
You make it very doable, very practical. And you're so right that it's like the commitment and consistency, right? That you can keep it simple, and this way it's not spamming, because I know that's a big concern with the cold email. People say, well, am I just spamming someone? Well, the answer to that is yes, if you keep sending like the same exact message to everyone else, and it's this big old thing no one wants to hear, but you're trying to help out the show, right? The host of that podcast needs guests, needs content, and you're saying, well, are you looking for interesting guests? And then getting that conversation going, so that way it's sort of both people are involved. And that's the problem with if you were on that date where if you were just the one talking and the other person wasn't talking, there's only one person involved. So this way, both people are working together and you're helping them out. And it's very doable for you to repeat the process or to outsource it, have an assistant do it, such as what you did with Liliana, where you just say, let me basically podcast stock this person, right? Let me just say, here's someone who's in my space, who's similar to me. And then I can just, instead of doing like keyword research and show research, you just say, well, what shows did they appear on? And then, and I mean, you can even do this, with like a handful of guests, even if you wanted to get crazy. But yeah, and this way you even have an in, because you say like, oh, I know this person, or I have this connection with this person. And so it's the way that you talk about it, describe this, it seems like a lot of fun. And so if someone wants to jump into this whole process, What's the next step? What is PitchDB all about, and how can it help save them time in doing this?
Yep. So PitchDB allows you to search over 3 million podcasts, over 140,000 local associations if you want to give a speech, right, or do a presentation, and over 38,000 media outlets if you want to be on the news or television or radio or something like that, right? And basically allows you to search for the person who's the host or the event planner and send them a basic email like I spoke to you about. You connect your email account, you send them the basic pitch, and then you just wait for them to respond. We don't allow you to do any automating, so each email is individually written. You can use a template and customize the template, but it isn't like set it and forget it and we just send 2,000 emails to people. We don't do that. We don't think that that's very ethical, right? So I'm a firm believer that if you do it right, you'll be fine. Right now, on average, 1 out of every 5 pitches that are sent using our software books a podcast booking, right? So we know that if you just do it consistently, we did a contest called the High Five Challenge, which was basically say hi to 5 people for 5 days, right? So it's like high five, 5 people for 5 days. So basically, they sent 25 pitches using our software. The worst person got 3 bookings. The best person got 12, right? But this person had already been on a bunch of podcasts. He already had everything going. The person that got 3 had never done any podcasting or anything like that. They had just started their business, right? So let me overcome the number one biggest elephant in the room that we always get. Oh, well, I don't want to go on a little bitty podcast. They don't have a bunch of people viewing. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to get out there and to help people. So if there were 5 people in the room that needed your service, you wouldn't help those 5 people because it wasn't 500, right? You would help 5 people in the room if they all were targeted and needed your service at some point. So why are we being so judgmental of podcasters of the certain size? So I'm going to give you a solution to that. When the podcaster posts the video on YouTube, take responsibility and run YouTube ads to your own content. Right. So whenever I'm on a podcast, I take $100 and I just run YouTube ads to it. Right. Because I want my podcast in front of my target audience, just in case if the podcaster didn't have my exact audience, I can still use that episode and get it in front of my people. Right. On YouTube, it costs me 1 penny per view. So for $100, I can put 10,000 views on any podcast that I'm ever on. So the view excuse is gone. And if I'm not willing to invest in myself, why should I expect you, Robert, to be willing to invest in growing the episode that I was on? I should be willing to do that myself. So I do it as a thank you to the podcast host. Like, hey, man, I know you're going to promote this to your people, but just in case, I'm going to still put $100 behind it and get another 5,000 to 10,000 views on it because I'm selfish. I want to win. I want people to see me. So that's why I'm out here doing it, man. So I think it's a win-win for both sides. But the biggest excuse that we get for people to take action is, well, I don't want to go on a little podcast. Well, you're just goofy, because if you were in a room with 5 people, you would talk to those 5 people. If you're in a room with 100 people, you would talk to those 100 people, not to mention 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. So what's the difference in what we're doing right now? If there's only 5 people listening to this, all 5 of you call me. I'll help you. I will individually write your pitches for PitchDB. I'll give you a free account if it's only 5 of you. That's how targeted you can be. If it's 100 of you, go to our website, sign up. We'll give you a free account. If it's 1,000 of you, go there, sign up. We'll give you a free account and some free pitches. I can tailor my pitch to the audience. That's the beauty of podcasting. So I think we just have to get out of our own way and be willing to win.
I agree. I love your energy, Ron. This is very inspiring. And I think that Twitter and Facebook has made us all very jaded about the numbers. Like things like Twitter and Facebook, if you get 5 views on Twitter, you're like, excuse me, you're like, is that a bot? Did someone view it? I mean, I think I saw something where Facebook used to say their average video was played for 2 seconds, and lately they downgraded it to 1 second. And so people have gotten very cynical about, well, only 5 people. on Facebook or Twitter is different than 5 listeners of your podcast. Or I saw someone a few years ago, they posted a picture of what 100 people in a room look like. And I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of people. But for some reason, when we think of terms of internet terms, we think 100 is small. But when you're thinking about podcast listeners, people who aren't just scrolling past in a newsfeed, who actually clicked and are listening right now, 100 is a huge number. And you and I both know that you're just looking for one, right? You're just looking for that to lead to that one sale or that one client or that one person's life that you change. And so, I mean, you could have, 3 million Instagram followers and they're all bots and who cares? So it's really easy to drive yourself crazy with those numbers. But I can tell that you're a salesperson and you're all about the quotas and the goals and the KPIs with that cool high 5 challenge. Say hi to 5 people for 5 days, and then using your service in your system, knowing that 20% of the podcast you contact, you'll get booked on, as long as you don't let all these silly obstacles get in your way, the self-defeat, the self-sabotage. Instead, it's time to take action and do it now. And even though we didn't have time to talk about lead generation or buying a business, that's good because you want to leave them wanting more, right? Well, we don't want to fit everything we know into one post or one podcast. So we will have to have you back to cover more topics. But for now, the focus is on cold email and on getting on podcasts. So if someone says PitchDB sounds amazing and Ron in general and his offer sounds amazing, I want to go there now. I want to sign up like he was telling me to. What's the web address and where do they go?
Right. So if you go to pitchdb.com/plank, PLANK, we'll have a separate page so that we can track how many people came from this podcast, right? And you can sign up and get a free account with PitchDB. Also, we'll make a special offer to you where it's not on the website. You won't find it. We'll give you the opportunity to sign up and get a one-time payment lifetime account. So you can pay one time and have PitchDB for the rest of your life and be able to pitch as many podcasts as you would like based on the one-time payment that you make. So I don't think there's a better deal out there. Normally, PitchDB is $97 a month. For less than that, you'll be able to get a one-time payment account to use PitchDB just because you're a listener of this podcast.
Fantastic. That's very generous of you, Ron. And that's a cool sort of growth offer. That's amazing. So pitchdb.com/PLANK. And as we wrap up and wind down our conversation here, Ron, you and I both know that it's fun to end with a bang instead of a whimper, right? End with something profound. So does any powerful advice come to you that you wish maybe you'd gotten 10 or 20 years ago? Does anything really stick with you as far as something that you wish you'd heard or that you wish to impart on our audience to really spring them in the action? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I wish every year I wish I would have started earlier, right? So the things that I did in 2022, I wish I would have been doing them in 2020. And the things that I'm doing now in 2023, I know I probably wished I would have been doing it 2 years ago. So there's never a better day to start than now. You'll look back on it and you'll say, holy crap. Most of the guys I started a podcast in 2014 and I interviewed John Lee Dumas and all of these big guys, right? And if I would have just kept doing that podcast, I see what they've grown to. I probably would have had a really large audience, right? But I went the software route. So I do have some regrets of not sticking with podcasting for that long, right? So my biggest thing for everybody, just get started. It's going to start off slow, but it gets better. Compound interest gets better on the back end. So yeah, just get started today because you'll regret it if you don't.
Just get started, but it's difficult to do it alone. So Ron is your buddy. Ron is your partner and your guide. So get started, but get started at pitchdb.com/plank, and we will see you there. And thank you, Ron, for showing up and blowing our minds and amazing us with some helpful lessons and stories and advice. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.